What's up, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Falcons Final Whistle podcast presented by Zaxby's. I'm Scott Bair alongside Tori McElhaney and Terrin Waack, and we're coming to you after a 9-7 Panthers victory over the Atlanta Falcons at Bank of America Stadium in Week 15 in a rain-soaked affair, and one that ultimately the Falcons, in what we've talked about several times, made too many critical mistakes at the exact wrong time and ultimately ended up losing a game that they expected to and probably should have won. And it was a big one, considering that this loss was paired with a victory by the New Orleans Saints and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they fall behind the NFC South in the one game down in the standings. They also find themselves behind in several of the primary tiebreakers. So before we get into the context of the NFC South and some of these other overarching themes, if I can say that correctly, what are immediate takeaways after a game where the Falcons don't allow a touchdown, end up losing on a Eddie Pinheiro field goal from 25 yards out as time expired?
I'll go first. I think that this game was kind of everything that I thought it was going to be going into it. You knew that it wasn't going to be high scoring. You knew it was going to be a slog. You knew it was probably not going to be a pretty game just from start to finish, just knowing that it was cold and wet and gross. But at the end of the day, I still went into this game expecting the Falcons to beat a 1-12 Panthers team. I even said that this Falcons team, needed not just to win this game, but I think to build up confidence after the loss from the Bucs, they needed a decisive win. They needed a win that they took the lead at the beginning, they held on to the lead, and there was never a doubt from the first quarter to the end of the game in the fourth quarter that they were going to win this game. That was my hope and expectation for this team going into it, and that is not at all what we saw. And I think that there should be levels of frustration, and there is levels of frustration coming out of the locker room. We talked to a lot of guys in the locker room after the game where they talked about that frustration. They talked about that disappointment. They talked about the fact that they expected to come in and win this game, even with the weather, even with the conditions, even with the injuries that have accumulated on the offensive and defensive line. But still, that expectations, I'm at the point now where I'm tired of the word expectations. I feel like I've written that word so much in the last couple of weeks that it's just kind of like I'm almost done using it, because for the last few weeks, month and a half, however long, I keep talking about these expectations that I had for this team and before the season started, and they haven't reached it.
The way you feel about the word expectation is how I feel about a must-win game, because I know before the Buccaneers game last week, I was like, they need to win this one. They got to notch 3 wins in a row for their confidence to keep the hold of the NFC South and even expand the gap. Then they lost that one. So then going into this one, knowing that they just lost the conference one, it was kind of like they need to win this one. This is a 1-12. Sorry to keep twisting that Panthers dagger, but it was a 1-12 team. They needed to win this to stay in it and not fall behind. Because it's also, this is a tough pill to swallow, because I want to say the weather was a factor, but then we saw them pull off a win in New York where it was rainy also and very crummy and even colder there. So it's both teams have to deal with the conditions. So it is what it is there. But 1-12 team, they didn't allow a touchdown and they still lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that so many of the words that we're using in Week 15, Tori brings up a good point: expectations and must win, and we can add so many others, right? Critical mistakes we use a lot.
Missed
opportunities, all those things we use a ton, and they're all appropriate words, but the repetition, I think, has come to define where this team is at right now. It's those things that keep cropping up. It's those things that the Falcons have been unable to get beyond. Arthur Smith was asked about inconsistency, and he essentially said that's something that we've been trying to eliminate all season long, the inconsistency, and that the turnovers are the biggest problem with it. Going back to the Texans game, how many other games, right? Could they overcome the critical mistakes or could they not overcome them? Because the critical mistakes were there.
Yeah.
Except for the first 2 games, really. And ultimately, that has been the trend of the season. And when you make these types of big time errors, often in critical areas, right? Desmond Ridder, just as an example, just because I was looking over those numbers. And thanks to Terrin for pulling up stats. She's so good at stats and they come so quickly. It's amazing. Stathead.com should just employ her because she's mastered their system. Anyway.
No, then they'll take her from us. We don't want that.
Yeah.
Are you
No,
handing off
never mind.
me as an
Ignore us,
employee?
Pro Football Reference. But so Desmond Ridder
Did I just get fired?
has committed. No, definitely not. We need you more than ever. So Desmond Ridder has committed 5 turnovers this season in the red zone. He's also committed 2 other turnovers within the Falcons 20 or closer to the end zone. So those are a lot of those types of high impact turnovers. We've all gone over all those numbers about turnovers that lead to points and set them back and create easy scores. And in a game of, and I'm going to bring it back to this game, in a game of field position where you need to play mistake-free football, when there is a conservative game plan that does make sense, it's about who makes fewer errors and who can win the battle of field position to create easy opportunities. Ultimately, that's what happened. But the one thing that I do want to bring up, and I'm not sure if I'm going in order of the script now, but Desmond Ridder throws an interception late. That was the turning point in this game. But they were at the Carolina 5 with 7-ish minutes to go. And then the Panthers marched all the way down the field and set up a position where they could kick a field goal as time expired. That's the 4th time that the defense has allowed a 4th quarter touchdown that was decisive. What do we make of a team? Yeah, points. Thank you. Yeah. What do we make of a team, of a unit that is talented, has weathered some injuries, and yet has become less effective in it, in crunch time? I have a tough time wrapping my head around that one.
I had 2 thoughts during that, where it's like you mentioned in the turnovers. It's not even like the Panthers were doing well at forcing turnovers this season. They were ranked last in the NFL with only 9 up until this week. So you had 2 in one game from a team that had given 9 through double-digit other games, 14, 15, whatever week we're in. Yeah. And then the second part with that, when it comes to the defense, it's just like that drive was 17 plays, which according to the Panthers PR was the longest drive in their history for 90 yards, which was their longest drive this season. So it's just like, I don't know.
17 plays. Wow.
Big pause at that moment.
Yeah. I think for me with this defense, I go back and forth too. It's something that I have a hard time weighing in my head, this defense, because this defense a lot of times is so good and so solid for 3 quarters. And then for some reason in the 4th quarter, when they absolutely have to have a stop, in 4 games, they haven't gotten it. And those 4 games they lost. And so it's hard for me to kind of sit here and be really happy, or as happy as I could with this defense, because this is still a defense that, I mean, for 3 games has not allowed a touchdown against opponents. And that's kind of a crazy stat in and of itself in the NFL. And so I just don't know. I have this weird love-hate relationship, I feel with the defense, where I'm I love watching them play. I love watching Calais Campbell get after it. I've really enjoyed Jesse Bates, just as a player, getting to watch him. And, you see guys like Arnold Ebiketie and Zach Harrison and Taquan Graham kind of coming into their own. And, but then it doesn't matter if they're not winning games. What does any of this matter? Right, yeah. What does any of this matter if the Falcons aren't winning games? And that was actually something that I asked Arthur Smith in last week. I asked him, I was because he was talking about these individual progress that he sees from specific players or specific units. And I asked him, I was how do you weigh in your head the fact that there is individual progress, but there are losses that affect the long-term plan? How do you weigh that in your head? And I mean, I don't have an answer to that, because the ultimate goal is to win games and to build something sustainable. Have the Falcons done that to this point? I don't know.
And it's so weird because
how much it's changed.
I was just going to bring that up 100%, right?
It's
because
changed.
Early on, you felt like this defense, stood up for the offensive struggles at times and really did things, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
what
They
is
teeter-tottered.
right? So what's flipped? I mean, nobody's using injuries as an excuse, but does wearing down depth, does depleting their rotations have an impact, or is it just going back to what I think Terrin has mentioned a few times in writing, where is it a confidence play at some point where all of a sudden it's kind of drifting in the opposite direction? I think that's a complicated thing to weigh out, but it is something that has changed over the course of the season. We talk about so many things remaining the same issues. Well, this is a relatively new one, but it's ultimately cost them 4 games. And you look at a couple of those victories, it's take a proper angle and you maybe win 2 of those games against Minnesota and Arizona, a 17 play drive. That's something that late can't happen. The weird thing, I don't know if this is a full circle moment or if that's not the right usage of it, but it was something that we were talking about actively in the press box and something that Tori wrote about in her post-game takeaways, is that if you look at what happened there in Charlotte on Sunday, and then you look at what happened in Charlotte last year in November of 2022, there are, look, it's not exactly the same situation, but there are some striking parallels to where you can probably, if the Falcons don't make the playoffs and it's a long shot for them to do so, you could probably at the end of the year in 2022 point back to at Carolina in the rain and say that was a real turning point. And you could probably look and you might be able to do that in 2023 and say maybe that was a real turning point there as well.
Yeah, I couldn't help but like as the rain is pouring down and remembering back to that Thursday night game in November 2022, and there were just so many moments where I was just like, this feels exactly like how that game felt. Like we were in the press box for that game. We were in the press box for this Sunday's game, and they felt similar. I mean, heck, I even went back and watched some plays from that 2022 game while we were waiting to get on the flight to come back to Atlanta on Sunday night. And I mean, they're even wearing the exact same uniforms, like both teams. It just felt like such I mean, with the rain and it was so crazy to me, almost like I don't even know, like an out of body experience where you're watching this and you're like, didn't I already watch this? And like, even to the point, and I went back and looked at this because this was what was so crazy. As I was in my post game story, I was comparing the play that I know a lot of people on Twitter probably remember of Marcus Mariota rolling out to his right, getting tripped up. And when he's falling, he throws the ball as he's falling and it gets picked off. Well, he was ruled down. So it ended up not being an interception, just was a sack. It was like a loss of 6. And then comparing that to what we saw Desmond Ridder do on that interception where he rolls out to his left, is under duress, is escaping pressure. He gets tripped up too, regains his footing, and then throws an interception. And even looking at the words that they chose to speak after the game when they were asked about those specific moments, literally a year and a month apart, it was striking to me. Marcus Mariota said in November 2022 after that game that he got in trouble and he hurt the team because he was trying to do too much. Desmond Ridder, after this game on Sunday, says it almost in the exact same way, I was trying to make a play. I tried to do too much. Like the fact that those are 2 things that happen in this place with the rain, with the implications of the postseason, with the quarterback. I mean, maybe I'm making something out of nothing, but I can't like look at that and not just like put a like parallel line. I feel like I'm in, y'all know on Sherlock where like the guy has all of the different like red ties that's like tying everybody together. That's legit how this made me feel, I swear.
Yeah, we're
As
all
someone who-
nerds, and we all know. Yeah.
I didn't get that reference, but I too am
Oh,
a nerd, so.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Yeah.
But I was also there last year and this year, and there were some striking parallels. And of course, I think Tori and I even said like the only difference is that it's
it was a night game before.
that it was night game last time, but it was one of those things where I think that Atlanta was in slightly more dire straits when it came to the postseason as it was this time. But as much as the players and coaches don't want to and aren't scoreboard watching, we're sitting there with a bunch of TVs and internet access, and we're watching Tampa Bay surge ahead and New Orleans get hot. And then you start to see the magnitude of these two games, and you think back, I think Arthur Smith even made reference to what a change has happened in the outlook of, I don't think he was referring to the outlook, but what a change over the course of 8 days. That you go back 8 days ago and you're talking about creating separation in the division while you're sitting on top. And then after that, you're thinking about being behind in the standings and the tiebreakers. And it feels so much different over the course of games that, look, I almost used the word expectation. Not gonna do it. But
people
I
on
think,
people on the pod can make it a drinking game.
right. Oh man.
Lord.
Don't drive after this one, or don't do that while you're driving. Either way, yes.
Neither.
Don't do any of that.
Don't do
None of
any of that. Forget I said anything.
There were definitely parallels, especially with those late turnovers that were so impactful. And look, we're getting ready to talk about Desmond Ridder. And it's therefore only fair to bring up that while his turnover count isn't of the same magnitude, is that Bijan Robinson put the ball on the ground. He's lost 3 fumbles, often in space. And that's another one of those types of situations where if you're going to be a feature back, those types of things can't happen. Full stop, period, the end. Tyler Algier is as ball secure as anybody. I think they needed Bijan Robinson to make a surge. They were playing conservative, running on a 3rd and medium long-ish, and he loses the ball there. And then Desmond Ridder loses the ball where I watched that play, I don't know, 20 times on a constant loop so I could get a good picture of it for my story. I know Tori did the same thing. I'm sure all Falcons fans have played it over in their head. And as he's coming around, he does have the edge. And Kadero Hodge makes a decent enough block where he can get back to the line of scrimmage or make a minimal gain. And it's 3rd and 9 maybe. And then you live to fight another day. And then you kick a field goal. That's the ultimate goal. And it changes the way that you have to defense it. And I think that's why. And also, if you look at the play, he's going to the edge. He's going to the left sideline. Kyle Pitts is very well covered near the left sideline. Drake is too far out of the play. He would have had to go across his body. And Cordero Patterson was around the end zone, right? But there were 2 defenders in front of him. So
There may have been 3.
right. So the trajectory and velocity was never getting to CP.
Yeah.
And even when Desmond was asked about kind of what he had seen and where he was going, I think he was trying to make a play, and ultimately that worked against them there.
And he said, he was like, I was trying to make a play, and he said exactly, he's like, in that moment, I have to either keep it and just run it or throw the ball away and live to fight another down, was kind of what he said.
Right.
And that's true. That's what that was.
But he did not fight another down.
No, that was it, especially because the Panthers went on a 17 play drive. And look, there's going to be plenty of opportunity after this season is over for the 3 of us to really dive into the Falcons' long-term quarterbacks situation. I don't think we're rewind. I don't think we're going to come to any conclusions right now, but I do think that after 10 interceptions and 10 fumbles, most of them lost, the critical down situations that we've talked about all season long, there is some uncertainty at the position. Arthur Smith was asked, because the plan after bringing Desmond Ridder back to the starting spot was that he would have the starting spot the rest of the way. That's not to say that he won't, but Arthur Smith was specifically asked about it, and he said nothing is set in stone. They have to evaluate, just like all other questions about personnel. You have to find a way. We need to win. So there is some uncertainty at quarterback, and I think that that's a fair level of uncertainty. Now, what you do moving forward over the next 3 games is up in the air, but I think Desmond Ridder has played 16 games as a starter now, 1 more, and he's gone through a full season. And I don't think that there's an absolute, yes, he's the guy. And I don't think it's 100% no necessarily. It could be got to bring in somebody to compete, but I definitely think uncertainty reigns when it comes to the quarterback spot.
Jake Matthews was asked about the confidence in Desmond Ridder after the game in the locker room. And he said completely, he fully trusts in Ridder's abilities and his leadership and whatnot. So there's at least a stability, it seems, among the offense itself. But then you think of the flip side in the Panthers locker room where Brian Burns is over there saying, we won because we capitalized on the Falcons' offensive mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and particularly calling out Desmond Ridder's play.
Yeah, that was a tough call out.
Right. And so I think like it's tough because I think what Scott said in his column after the game was really true. Like, I do think that Desmond Ridder has done some good things, but at this point in time, it's like, does the bad outweigh the good? And it makes you wonder kind of where the Falcons do go from here, because I mean, I don't want to get like too far into like talking about the draft or free agency or anything like that, because we're not there yet. But these are questions that they have to answer since the moment that Matt Ryan was sent to the Colts. This has been a question. What will the Falcons do long term for a starting quarterback or a franchise quarterback? What is the plan here? And we are now going into year 4 of this regime, and it's like that's a major question, if not the question that I have about this team.
Yeah. And I think and there's going to be so much time to talk about and evaluate the assets that they have available. So let's just wrap this one up with the NFC South standing. As we've already said, every other team in the NFC South won except the Falcons. They've now lost 3 games. No, I'm sorry. They've lost 2 games within the division. Mm-hmm. And this one, because tiebreakers are division record, and with a multiple team, obviously head to head, and with a multiple team tie, it goes to NFC record. The Falcons lost both the NFC South game and an NFC game as well, especially with Tampa and New Orleans winning. In previous seasons, and when we mentioned this before, we've gotten to latter portions of the year, and the Falcons needed to win and get some help. Well, before the Tampa Bay game, they just needed to win and take care of their business. Lost that game, and then it became essentially a 3-way race for who can finish the best: the Bucs, the Saints, or the Falcons. Now the Falcons are behind the 8 ball in that race as well. And look, they still have life. That was one thing that was continually said, but I think that we can all admit that this was a significant setback. It's turning more into long shot territory than it was previous to these 8 days. And it's going to take another one of those, win a bunch and get help. But going back to the expectation thing, that's not an expectation that we can set and have until the Falcons can, prove it.
Calais was talking about how like they need help now, and it like goes back to what Tori was saying about the 8-day window kind of being like a roller coaster of emotion. Because before they were in control and now they need help, and he was like, we just got to do our best and hope the help comes along the way. Because yikes, yeah, and to go from being comfortable to possibly expanding the lead to losing the lead and being backward all within a week's time.
Couple weeks, yeah.
That's tough. Like,
yeah.
It is a mental thing. You have to wonder how they're going to go into this week with practice and then also a home game. I think it's a home game, but still, like, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. You have 3 games left in the season, and your best bet is to win out and to hope that someone else, i.e. the Saints and or the Bucs, lose at some point. So for that, it's like to go from kind of feeling like you have almost like autonomy over what you're doing and your potential for the playoffs and your potential for the postseason, to have that autonomy to feel like you like whatever you do is in your hands and like you decide your future and your postseason, to no longer have that, and Terrin, exactly like what you said, and for it to swing so quickly is something that I think this organization has not experienced, even in the conversations of the last few years of like kind of hanging around in the conversation. But they had the title in reach.
They had it.
If they went out and beat the Bucs, if they went out and beat Carolina, if they went out and beat the Saints at the end of the year, like that's what you want. You want that. And that's something that, again, at the beginning of the year, it kind of felt like NFC South champions or bust. So that's just where, I mean, these guys in the locker room, they want to win. I feel like I'm not saying anything that they wouldn't say themselves either.
Yeah, they want to win. They want to finish strong, but I think that it is a change of mindset from those of us who are observing. Is that you no longer kind of have that ultimate control. It's kind of what everybody is saying here, and I think that that's dead right. To see their reaction over the course of the next couple of weeks, Indianapolis is coming to town, and they've been pretty tough. They beat Pittsburgh again. They keep surging above and above 500. They're in a playoff race, and they're going to want to win that game. And then it's at Chicago in a game that should be cold, and then at home against the Saints. So it will be interesting to see how the Falcons finish up and what else happens in and around the division. But there's no sense in mincing words. This was a significant setback for the Falcons, especially when everybody else in the division won. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Falcons Final Whistle podcast presented by Zaxby's. For Terrin and Tori, I'm Scott. We will catch you again after the Colts game. Thank you so much for Christmas time. Thank you so much for downloading and listening and subscribing to the Atlanta Falcons Podcast Network. We will talk to you again next week. See you.